to this webinar on 7 ways to write more effective email. My name is Stuart Snooks and I'm an email strategist who specialises in helping people to be more effective in the way that they use email. This webinar is set to go for about 45 minutes or so. It might be a little bit longer with some questions and answers. So take lots of notes. It is being recorded so that if you miss anything you can go back and review the recording, including the slideshow. And for those who've got a copy of the handout, you can take some notes on that. But I'll also send you a completed version of that at the conclusion of the webinar so that you don't miss anything. If you want to ask questions, there's two ways to ask questions. You can type into the chat box that you can see there on your screen, or you can click the hand icon and that will raise your hand. I should see that, and then I can unmute your microphone and you can ask your questions. Some questions are easier asked verbally than trying to type them in. So we'll aim to finish in 45 minutes or so. So let's get started. And what we're going to cover today is how to write a powerful email that actually gets attention, engages your reader, and motivates them to take the action or response that you're requesting. As I said, it includes the handout for you to work on throughout the webinar, a completed version when we're finished. Plus, we'll send you an MP3 recording of me being interviewed about this subject. And then I'll also send you a link to a series of PDF tip sheets which are downloadable for each of the 7 ways to write more effective email captured in writing that you might like to download and print and even laminate as needed. Hopefully you'll pass some of these ideas on to your colleagues as well, because we all need to know how to break through when writing email. Just quickly, the context in which we're talking about this subject is the challenge of email overload. None of us here are struggling to get enough email. Our problem is juggling the overload, and the key issues here are firstly the volume, the fact that a lot of it that turns up arrives as an interruption. Number 3 is the relevancy. There's a lot of noise and not enough signal with email. Many people complain about the volume and the amount of spam and irrelevant email that they're getting. And the 4th one is time. Most of us are time poor, and we struggle to have enough time to keep up with all our workload, let alone the avalanche of email that we're expected to handle as well. So you can probably relate to one or more of those 4 issues, if not all 4 of them. And in the context of sending email, you and I are sending email to people that are already overloaded with volume. Our email probably arrives as an interruption. The recipient is probably going to struggle to see the relevancy unless we do a better job. And of course, they're already time pressed, time poor. And how do we get their attention? How do we engage them when our email arrives into an environment which is overloaded? So that's what we're going to look at today. So just quickly to get started, what's your greatest frustration when writing and sending email? Here's a chance to use that text box. Just type into the text box, what would be your biggest frustration when you're a sender of email? And I'll just collate some of the responses there, and we'll have a look at some of the research that's come out on that. So if you get a chance, type that in now. Some people say it's getting no response. Some people say it's getting the tone right. Others say, how do you get their attention? How do you structure an email? What's the etiquette? There's all sorts of frustrations that we have as writers of email. The big one, of course, is that when you send off an email, you don't get a response. With a phone call, you know that you've been heard and understood. With a face-to-face interaction, you know that you've been heard or understood. And if you haven't, you can see that and you can clarify. But when you send off an email, you don't get a response often. You certainly don't get it straight away. And the question that goes through your mind is, did they get it? Are they ignoring me? Are they being rude? Are they out of town? Have they died? We just don't know. It doesn't close the loop when we're sending emails. So that can be a great frustration. So let's have a look at unpacking some of that and how we can firstly get their attention, but then also word the email in a way that gets the message across in the way that it's meant to get across and not misunderstood, but then also gets them to respond. So let's have a look at this. Just quickly, some of the research, and this is 7.5 years worth of surveys that I run for organisations that I run in-house programs for, and they're asked to rate 17 common email problems on a scale of 1 to 10, and 1 is no problem, 10 is a major problem. And the one that comes up number 1 here, as you can see, is getting no response to your email. When you send a message that clearly requires a response, or you don't get that quickly enough. The second one is people trying to resolve complex issues via email. and you can understand why that's the case. When we're overloaded, when we're getting a large volume, when we struggle to see the relevancy, any sort of complexity in email really bogs us down. The third one is email interruptions when you're working on other higher priority tasks. The fourth one is procrastinators who seem to wait till the last minute to request something from you by email when you know they've had plenty of time. And then the fifth one is subject lines that are unclear or don't match the message. They're the top 5 bugbears that people have when using email, and as you can see, a number of those relate to messages that come in, but also some of them relate to messages that go out. The key point here is that number one is getting no response to email. So what we're going to talk about today is some strategies and some ideas that help us to reduce that as our number one problem. And you can see the other 17 there, but as you can see, those top 5 are a fair deal more of an issue than the rest. So looking at this, if this is the number one problem, getting no response to your email, who is at fault here? Is it the sender or is it the receiver? And of course, a lot of people say, oh, it's the receiver's fault. But can I suggest that it's perhaps both? Is there something that we can do as a sender that gives us a better chance of getting the response that we want? Are there some ideas? We can't control the receiver, but maybe we can influence them by the way that we send the original email. So here are the 7 ways to write more effective email. The first one is to think first. Is email in fact the best way for either this message and or for this person? We'll unpack that. Number 2 is some of the dilemma of communicating in an age of speed where everything's urgent, everything's in a rush. How can we communicate effectively in the age of speed? Again, we'll unpack that shortly. One of the bigger ones out of these 7 is the number 3, what is your desired outcome? I dare say none of us are sending email hoping to get paid. We have some other sort of outcome, and it's pretty good if we have a clear idea of that and then can communicate that to those who are receiving our emails. Number 4 is how to write better quality subject lines. Of course, the subject line is the first thing that people see. So how can we use that bit of space to maximize our impact? Number 5 is how do we automate your follow-up? Many times we have to follow up on emails we've sent because we either haven't got the response or we haven't got it quickly enough. How can we automate that? How can we take some of the drudgery out of that? Number 6 is the structure or format in which we write an email makes a big difference, and we'll talk about why the inverted pyramid structure is the one that works the best. And the last of these 7 is why you should write an email backwards. Hopefully that's piqued your curiosity, and we'll unpack that in due course. But to get started on a couple of general principles, number 1 is we should write to suit the reader. We can write to suit ourselves. We can write an excellent message that we understand quite clearly, but if it's not understood the same way by the reader, then it hasn't done its job. So as a general principle, write to suit the reader. The second one is writing the sort of messages that get attention, engage interest, and get a response. Usually take more time rather than less. So let's face that as a unfortunate truth and take time at the front end of the communication process as we're sending the email, rather than pay a much bigger chunk of time at the back end when we now have to chase up, follow up, guess, double guess, second guess, try to get the result that we wanted. The third of these general principles is what I call Murphy's Law. Is that anything that you write can and probably will be misunderstood, particularly if it's an email, particularly if it's arrived as an interruption, particularly if it's read as a distraction under time pressure. There's a very high chance that what you're trying to communicate will be misunderstood. Not deliberately, but it's just the nature of the environment in which your email arrives. So that's the first thing to consider. The second one is that every email you send should actually add value or advance the conversation. Emails such as thanks and you're welcome, and while they are nice, they don't actually add any value or advance the conversation, and to be honest, we're all better off without them. And that way, the occasional one that you do send with thanks does add value because it's rare and it is valued. The other point here is to remember that every email response that you can avoid will save you 5 to 10 minutes in thinking, reading and typing. We want to reduce the quantity but increase the quality of our email communications. So on to number 1, think first. Is email the best way for this message or person? What sort of messages do you think are not appropriate to be sent by email? And here's a chance to interact just type into the chat box what sort of messages are not appropriate to be sent by email. Just let me know what you think, and then we'll unpack some of these. Hopefully something comes to mind quite quickly. Obviously, your fired email is probably not the appropriate way to use the tool, and some of the thoughts, I'll capture those and we'll show them on the next slide. So if you've got an idea of what sort of emails are not appropriate to be, or messages are not appropriate to be sent, just type that in now. And I'll summarise that on this next slide. Here they are. Over the years, this is what we've found to be the sort of answers to that question. Anything that's confidential or a private message, obviously. Anything that's offensive or abusive, that's quite obvious. Delivering bad news, email's not really the best medium for that. As we saw in the survey, people trying to resolve complex issues, email's not the appropriate tool. A delicate negotiation, disciplinary reprimands, performance reviews are not appropriate. And the one people often miss is urgent messages. Email is not the appropriate tool for urgent messages, and we'll have a look at exactly why that is in just a minute. Meeting requests, again, email is not the best way for meeting requests. Gossip, rumours, closing a sale, that really needs the personal touch. So there's a list of types of messages that are not best sent by email. Moving on to the second part of this, what sort of people is it not appropriate to communicate with via email? The message might be fine, but the person may be not. So again, if you can think of the sorts of people that it's not appropriate to try and communicate with via email, you could type those in, but let me summarise them here fairly quickly. Those in roles that don't have access to email often or at all, obviously, you might be better off contacting them in another way. Those that have perhaps reading problems or limitations, many older generations can struggle to use email well, and you'd be better off to use another form of communication. Even though the message might be fine, the person maybe not. There are certain personality styles that just aren't email savvy. There's the sort of person who prefer to have a verbal conversation. They're very good on the phone, but they really struggle with digital or written forms of communication. And of course, people with other languages and cultures can struggle with your message because it's written, not because the message is wrong for email, but because they will struggle understanding it the way that you want to communicate it, given the language and cultural barriers. So there's a few ideas. Again, surveys would show that about 28 to 29% of email should actually be handled by a verbal conversation. That's a consistent number that I see in the research that I do before workshops, as people are saying around 28 to 29%. It's remarkably consistent, actually. So nearly 1 in 3 emails would be better off communicating verbally, face-to-face or on the phone. Email is just not the appropriate tool for those communications. In terms of personality styles, here's some thoughts on how to communicate with different personality styles, just quickly. The driver, sensor, director, leadership style personality who just wants the facts, get to the point quickly, use bullet points. They want to move on very quickly, suggest possible actions that they can agree with, and be practical with a sense of urgency. However, as you can see at the bottom, analysts and thinkers, perfectionists, if you like, they want logic, they want the details, they want facts, they want the background information. So they want to see thoroughness, and they want logic rather than emotion. And you can see how the expressives and the amiables fit in between. And so we just need to fine-tune our email to suit different personality styles. Even though the message might be appropriate, we can fine-tune it to suit the different people. So there's a few thoughts on that. I'll just leave you a couple of seconds to have a quick look at that and see if something stands out for you. And if you've had a look at that, let's move on. And you can review this in the recording, of course. And in terms of when to email, what sort of messages are appropriate for email? Here's a list. A meeting is better off as a calendar invite rather than an email ping-pong back and forward. Delegation of a simple task, sure, email, but if it's complex, we're better off to have a conversation face-to-face and then follow it up with an email. You can see there for yourself that email is appropriate for some of these sorts of communications, but it's not the best way to communicate other messages. And again, you might like to unpack that and begin to change the way that you send some of the messages according to the sort of communication tool that would be appropriate. So moving on, here's why. Communication in the age of speed. This is what I call a media richness framework that's based on a model by Daft and Lengel. And as you can see, we have a range of communication tools. Here's just 6 of them. And at the left-hand side, you've got the instant messaging style of communications. Then you have email, voicemail, phone call, video, and meeting. And as you move across the page there, you're getting greater context or richness to your communication. However, the time needed to communicate that message increases. It takes a lot longer to pick up the phone and have the conversation than to just fire off an email. You don't have to make sure the other person's available on the phone. It takes a lot longer to set up and then have a meeting and communicate your message than it does to send a quick text message. However, it also increases your degree of understanding. The longer it takes and the richer the message, the greater the understanding and the less potential for misunderstanding. So there's swings and roundabouts whichever way you go. 3 considerations for which communication tool to use. Number 1, how easy is it for you to be misunderstood? Secondly, what is the impact if your message is misunderstood? And the third point then is how quickly can you recover or rectify the situation if you have been misunderstood? Too often, because it's easy, cheap, convenient, we will use the email tool because it's right in front of us, when in fact another method would be more appropriate, particularly when you start considering things like, are you going to be misunderstood and what the implications are. So looking at our framework here, you can see that at the left-hand side with Twitter and instant messages and email, you've got digital forms of communication, they're written forms of communication. When you get to voicemail and then phone call, you have auditory or the spoken word. And with video and meeting, you obviously add a visual component as well. So you can see why there's greater richness. And then another thing to think about is that your instant messages, email and voicemail are all asynchronous forms of communication. We don't have to have both parties available at the same time. Whereas a phone call, a video conference and a meeting are synchronous forms of communication. You need both parties to be available to talk at the same time. Now, we talked earlier about urgent messages are not appropriate to be sent via email, and here's why. An urgent message by its nature needs to be a synchronous communication. It needs clarity, it often deals with complexity, and it needs full understanding right now, straight away. That's why it's urgent. However, what's email? Is email a synchronous tool or an asynchronous tool? As you can see there, it's an asynchronous tool, and so urgent messages are not appropriate to be trying to send via email. We're better to pick up the phone or get a face-to-face meeting somehow rather than rely on email, or at least rely on email on its own. The email might be appropriate after the conversation or along with the conversation, but not instead of the conversation. So hopefully that model there gives you a bit of an insight, a visual insight into the different modes of communication and where email fits into the mix. It isn't the one and only, it isn't the be-all, it isn't the one that suits every situation, and we should be wise enough to use the communication mode that achieves the best outcome. So that's our dilemma in communicating in the age of speed. We're all in a hurry, however, our communications lack richness and there's a high degree of potential for misunderstanding. And so when those 2 factors are important, let's move towards the right-hand side of the model and use a more appropriate mode of communication. I'll just pause here now in case you've got any questions or observations to make. So if you have a thought or a question at all, click the hand icon and I can unmute your microphone and you can ask that verbally, or just type into the chat box there and I hopefully will see that and can respond to you. So I'll just pause for a moment there for you so that you can reflect on number 1 and 2 from the 7 ways to write more effective emails. And you may be typing there. While you're doing that, I'll just click on and have a quick look at how you can reduce email volumes. Most of us are overloaded, and here's a few thoughts on how you can reduce email volumes. And I was just in a meeting today where the fellow was saying, gee, I find that the less email I send, the less I get back, and that's a key rule. The more you send, the more you will get. One email seems to breed more and more email. Another way of reducing email volumes is no question, no reply. Just let people know if there's no question in your email, I won't be replying, and it reduces the sense of wondering when is the conversation finished. If there's no question specifically to be answered, then you won't reply. You can let people know. Add it as a PS to your signature block, and it reduces the unnecessary email. You can also establish financial thresholds for those who are managers or supervisors. You can let your subordinates know that instead of emailing you with every little request, that they can, for example, and Timothy Ferriss talks about this in his book, The 4-Hour Workweek, he went to his people and said, listen, if it'll cost less than $100 to fix that problem or answer that question, you do it, fix it yourself, don't have to ask me. And what it does is allows for independent decision making at the lower level, which is more appropriate, and reduces some of this unnecessary back and forth email volumes, so that Timothy Ferriss found that he was spending $200 an hour time on $20 an hour problems and issues that could have been dealt with at a more appropriate level. So that's an idea for establishing thresholds. And then the last of these is use if-then instructions. As senders, rather than just send off an email that says, has that delivery arrived or has that invoice been paid, also add in if-then scenarios. If the delivery has arrived, please pass it to John. We need those widgets unpacked straight away. If it hasn't, please ask Julie to use the tracking number to chase it down because we need to get that in today. So that way, in one email, you answer both scenarios, and that speeds up decision making. It reduces the back and forth emails unnecessarily, and it doesn't take a lot of effort, extra effort, to include those when you write your email. Hopefully, there's something in there that you can start to use to make a difference, to reduce email volumes for yourself and make your send email more effective. So moving on to number 3 of the 7 of these ways to write more effective email, and this is the big one. I think you're going to find great value in this one. It's what is your desired outcome? As I teach people when we talk about how to manage incoming email more effectively, there's only ever 4 things you do with incoming email. It's called the 4 Ds. And just quickly, there's the 4 Ds are ditch or delete. The second one is deal with it straight away. It'll take 2 minutes or less to deal with. The third one is delegate, when the next action needs to be done by somebody else. And the fourth is decide, make a decision. And the 3 possible decisions are, where is it going to be stored? Secondly, when am I going to get to it? Because it's more than 2 minutes. It's a 15-minute or a 30-minute task, and you can drop that into your calendar. Convert the email to a calendar appointment that you get back to at a specific time. And the last of those decisions is you have to wait. Sometimes you have to wait for somebody or for something else before you can move forward, and you can pop that into a pending reply folder. But as you probably forget it, you can add a reminder to it first. So that's the 4 Ds. Now when it comes to sending email, again, we only ever want one of 4 outcomes. And the first of these is you want the other person to take an action. Please write a report for a 10% saving in our freight costs, or please go and turn off the tap, or please clip Johnny around the ears. They need to take some sort of an action. The second one is you want a response. There's no need to take action, but please respond to my email. Has that invoice arrived? Has that delivery been paid? Has that invoice arrived? Has that invoice been paid? Do you have blue eyes? Are you available for a meeting next Tuesday? Which is the way we often use it, but shouldn't. We should actually send a meeting request via calendar. The bottom line is you want a response of some sort. The third possible outcome that you want is you want the person to read, but that's all they need to do. They don't have to take action. They don't have to respond. John, please read this report. We're going to be having a discussion about it in our team meeting on Thursday. I need to make a decision, so you need to read it, but that's all you need to do. Don't need to take action or respond to me. Just read that. Or maybe it's a document that you send to someone who requests it and say, John, you need to read this because this is the document you asked me to send you. But you don't have to take action as far as I'm concerned or respond to me. And then the fourth of these possible outcomes is FYI. For your interest, you might like to read it. Reading is optional. It's not compulsory. Whether you read it or not is up to you. Listen, Jenny, I've sent you a really, really good joke, but whether you read it or not is up to you. Or Greg, I've sent you an interesting article on customer service. Thought you might be interested, but whether you read it or not is up to you. It's optional. So looking at those 4 potential desired outcomes, can you think of anything that you send via email that doesn't fit into one of those 4? It pretty much covers it, doesn't it? So if that's the case, why don't we write these words in the subject line as the very first thing that people see when they get our email? For example, if you get an email that has action required in the subject line, does that get your attention? I'm sure it does. And of course you go, what is that? And you pay more attention and you go looking for what it is that's required of you. And as a sender, that's exactly what you and I want. We want people to take attention and go looking. The other thing that helps with this is that if you get these subject lines in your inbox, it helps you to prioritize. Obviously, an action required is going to be a higher priority than a read only. A response requested is going to be higher priority than an FYI. So again, it helps your receivers prioritize their email. Let's unpack this a bit more. What you can do is you can actually set up these 4 subject lines as drafts in your drafts folder. And you can see what I've done here on screen. What you do is you create a new email with action required in the subject line and then save the email, and it'll save it into drafts, and then cross out of that without saving and then create a new email again from scratch, this time with response requested, 3rd one read only, 4th one FYI. And when you've finished saving the 4 of them, there they are sitting in your drafts folder. So now instead of in future going to new email, don't click on new email like you have been over the years. Go to drafts, select the drafts folder, and then it makes you think, which one of these 4 outcomes do I want? You highlight that email with the subject line, for example, read only, and then you click the forward button, and it opens up a new email with your auto signature in it. It's got the appropriate subject line, as you can see here, and you're all set to go. The beauty about this is not so much the time saving, because you've already pre-written the subject line, but it's the fact that it makes you think what outcome you want. And that way you've got a much better chance of the sender doing what you want them to do, because you've made it clear to them. They don't have to work it out, you've made it easy for them to know. And of course, something like an action required or a response requested is going to be seen as a high priority at their end. So that's a great way to use drafts for subject lines. Never use the new email button again. Go to drafts, select which one of the 4 you want, and click forward. And you'll notice that it doesn't have the FWD at the start of the email. That does happen when you forward other emails. That's what the drafts folder is designed for. So I'm hoping that you'll find that a real benefit. Establishing what's your desired outcome and then putting it into drafts to make it easy for yourself in future. Over the years, I have found that response requested is the one I send most, then action required, read only, I only send a small number of those, and I never send FYI. If people don't have to read it, I won't send it to them. I know they're already overloaded. And of course now hopefully I get a reputation for only sending email that's highly relevant, and so I rise up the pecking order in order of those that get attention from my readers. So let me just pause here and give you a bit of a poll. I'll just launch this poll now. How promptly do you expect to get a response when you're sending an email? So I'll just launch that poll now, and you can select from the options that are available. And the options there, of course, I expect a response immediately, or I expect a response within 2 to 4 hours. Do you expect your response same day, within 24 hours, or within 2 to 3 days? Great. Okay. So that's great. I'll just capture that. Yes, and most of us saying same day. Very few people are expecting an immediate response when they send an email. A very small percentage do expect within 2 to 4 hours. That's around a third of people, but 2/3 of people are happy to wait same day or up to 24 hours for a response, and that is regarded as the standard business practice, is that you'll get a response within 24 hours as a maximum. However, as senders, that's our expectation, but as receivers we often put a lot of pressure on ourselves to have to respond quickly. And so this is why it's important that when you write an email, you also add to your desired outcome what sort of deadline or time frame that you're wanting. So here's 4 possibilities, and each of these are interchangeable with the 4 subject lines. So you want an action required and it's due by, or I need you to read this, but that's all you need to do, and this is the deadline. Or please respond to me before such and such. So in order to write a good subject line, we need to, along with the desired outcome, add a time frame. And then the other thing that helps us by using this framework is to target the message more effectively. If you want someone to take an action, are you going to put them in the to or the CC line? I think it's pretty obvious they're going to go in the to line. If you want them to respond, again, they'll be someone that you put in the to line. But if all they have to do is read it, don't have to take action, don't have to respond, you can CC them. And of course, FYI, if you sent FYI at all, you'd certainly send it as a CC. And so now you target the message appropriately. If someone doesn't have to take action or respond, they can be CC'd. But if you do want them to take action or respond, CC is not going to work. We need to put them in the to line. So again, this framework of thinking about your 4 desired outcomes helps you to target the message more effectively as well. And of course, in terms of BCC, we should really only use that to control replies and to safeguard privacy. And by that I mean, rather than put 10 or 20 or a lot of people in the CC line so they can all see each other's email addresses, you might want to safeguard that privacy by putting them in the BCC instead. And the other thing is that if anyone replies, hits reply all, if it's BCC, it only comes to you, whereas if it's CC, it goes to everyone. So again, it helps you to use BCC more appropriately. Now I'm just getting a little bit of feedback that the sound is dropping in or dropping out. So I'll just wait a second and hopefully it'll kick back in, and perhaps you can just type in and let me know if you're hearing me again. I will type that in now as well, and hopefully that problem, which does occur with technology sometimes, will be overcome. So if you can hear me now, just type back and let me know. No, we're not getting the hearing. I'll continue on because we've got the recording, and hopefully we will be able to have those who are struggling with the audio at the moment, that'll come back online. So I'll just pause for a second while you're having a look at that and quickly type a message to people. Now, and we're moving on to number 4, what makes a good subject line? Firstly, there's the part we've talked about where you've got the action required, response requested, or the read-only FYI. We also need to add to that desired outcome a time frame, as we talked about. Be time specific. If you send off an email without a time frame, you tend to lose control of when people will get back to you. It doesn't mean it's a straitjacket or you're being demanding. It's just a line in the sand saying, hey, can we have this action by 11 o'clock Wednesday? But if you put no time frame, who knows when you're going to get it back? At least it lets the recipient know what you're aiming at, and if that doesn't work for them, they can come back to you and you can negotiate an alternate time frame. And then the third part of what makes a good subject line is, of course, the part that most of us are writing now, which should be a clear, concise description of the subject. If you looked at your subject lines, how many of those 3 parts are in your email now? I dare say it's probably only the third, and a good subject line will have all 3. It takes a little bit of time, but it makes it very easy for the receiver to understand what's required from them, when it's required from them, and what it's all about. You'll find you'll get better responses because people can very quickly sum up and understand what your email's about when you use these 3 components in a subject line. Great. And again, using the 3 components of a subject line works whether it's in the to or it's in the CC. So it works for all the 4 different desired outcomes that you could send for your email. In terms of attachments, people sometimes ask me about sending attachments. Here's a few considerations. As much as possible, send a document link or a hyperlink instead of an attachment. We're all overloaded. We've all got mailboxes that are now getting full very quickly, particularly with the size of attachments these days. Can you remember when 1 meg was a big deal as an attachment? We're now regularly seeing attachments that are 5 and 10 meg or more, and it might be more appropriate to send a document link instead. If you're sending a number of attachments, a couple of things you could do is attach a note in your body of your email explaining the number of attachments, the order they should read them in, and then direct them towards specific sections that require their attention. Any email with one, let alone 4 or 5 attachments, is overwhelming, and you'll help your receivers a great deal by directing them to the parts that are most likely to be relevant for them. And the other thought is, when you're sending email with attachments to smartphones, copy and paste the key information into the body of the email, because attachments are very hard to manage and to open and to read in a smartphone environment. So a few considerations there. Another question for you is, how do you keep track of emails you need to follow up? Do you try and remember them mentally? Do you make a note in a to-do list? Do you add them to your calendar with a reminder? How do you keep track of these things? Well, here's a few ideas on that. As you're writing a new message, what you can do is click the follow-up button. What a lot of people find that they have to do is they send off an email, they get no response, and now they have to ring to follow it up. And what we can do is remove at least that first step, that first manual step in following up, and automate that by adding a reminder to the outgoing email. So as you write the email, you can click the follow-up button. You come down here to add reminder, as you can see, and then when you click that, you get this drop-down, this extra window open up, and you can put in a reminder for yourself to follow up at 4 o'clock on Friday. Now, here's the powerful part, which a lot of people don't realize. You can also add a reminder for the recipient, so that the one email's got a reminder for you, but it's also got a reminder for them, and your reminder for them can be 2 hours earlier. So it saves you having to follow up manually, or it might be 2 days or 2 weeks or whatever time's appropriate. That way, your initial email does the first bit of prompting or reminding, instead of you having to do that manually. Now, you need to use this carefully, and I would suggest either getting permission from your recipient to say, hey Jenny, this is so important for both of us, how about I put a reminder on it so we don't miss it. And once they give you permission to put a reminder on it, you then use that as permission to use it whenever it's appropriate in the future. Or to get around that, if perhaps that conversation's a bit cumbersome, what you can do is in the body of the message of your email, you can let them know, hey, listen, I've added a reminder on this for both of us so that we don't drop the ball on this, we don't miss the deadline. And again, it lets them know that there's a reminder in it for them. So if they haven't got back to you, this reminder will pop up on the screen as a reminder pop-up, and it saves you having to do it manually or remembering to do it manually. You may still have to follow through later if they ignore that or don't deal with that, but at least you've given yourself a chance of automating that process rather than having to do it manually every time you need to follow through on an email. Hopefully that idea is one that you can make use of in the coming days and weeks. Moving on to keeping track of these, you can keep track of these in your search folders. Now, one of the search folders that's available to you at the bottom of your folder list is search folders and the for follow-up folder. Now, if you find that yours is not there, just right-click on search folders and add a new search folder, and for follow-up is one of the options. And then you can see that in your follow-up folder, you've got all these messages that you flagged with a reminder, and also the folder that it's in. So this will find any message that you've flagged, regardless of the folder that it's in. What I'm suggesting here is that in this folder, you can keep track of email that you've sent out that you've got reminders on. Obviously, it's black if it's pending, and it turns to red if that reminder falls overdue. So that very quickly tells you where things are in terms of up to date. And in this panel here at the top of each of the emails, it will tell you exactly what's going on with that email. It tells you when you started it, when it's due by, when the reminder is for yourself at 4 o'clock, when the reminder is for them at, say, 2 o'clock. So in that one area, you can keep track of all the things that you're needing to follow up. You don't have to drag anything to the folder. All you do is, as you send an email, right-click, add a reminder, and when you've done that, it'll be flagged, and it will immediately appear in this for follow-up folder. So you can keep track of all those emails you've sent out that you need to be following up and being responsible for. So again, like so many things in this Outlook tool in particular, and the same principles work in other email software programs, you can use the power of the software rather than having to rely on your own memory to manually do so many of these things. Hopefully that helps. The sixth of the 7 ways to write more effective email is known as the inverted pyramid structure. Now, this is also known as the journalistic style of writing, and it's the way newspapers are written. And this is where the main point is up front. the headline of a newspaper article is the main point, and only after that does it have the supporting details, which gives background reasons, explanations, interesting information, and then you finish off with any next steps and a short close and sign off. And here's why this works, why it's called the journalistic style of writing. So your most important information is in the top of your email as your main point. Your less important is next, and then your least important. Give them, if you like, the must-have information, followed by the should-have, and then the nice-to-have in this inverted pyramid structure or shape. And here's why. Studies of the way our eyes move when we're looking at websites and emails has found this distinct F shape, this phenomenon called the F shape, where when we're looking at our screens, we tend to read across the first paragraph or sentence. We then scan down and we read across the second paragraph or sentence, but not as far as the first one. And then after that, we tend to scan downwards the rest of the email. And so what happens is, if your main point is at the bottom of the email, you really struggle to get people to attend to it. They've tuned out or they've missed it because they're only scanning by this stage. So by putting your main point up front, firstly, they're more likely to get it, but also it suits all those different personality styles that we were talking about earlier. Your director, driver, controller, leadership style personality who just wants the facts can read the main point and bang, make their decision and give you what you want, or give you your answer or take the action. Your analyst, thinker, melancholy, perfectionist style personality who wants to know who, what, where, why, when, how much, well, they can read the whole of the email and then they'll do what you want. And other personality styles can tune out when they've got as much information from your email as they need to do what you want them to do, in the same way that we often tune out of reading a newspaper article halfway through. The way they're written is the most important information is up the top and it gets least important, and often we tune out. So you can see that same structure with an email works for all the different types of people that you could send it to, whether it's one-on-one or whether you send your message to many people. So remember, think of it as the 5:30 rule. Give them the 5-second version as the main point up front, and then give them the 30-second version, if you like, with more detail later that explains and unpacks your main point. Another way to think of it is put your summary before your details, your requests before the reasons, your solutions. Give your solution before you explain how you got to that solution, and give your recommendations before you outline the background information. It's nearly the opposite of the way we naturally communicate. In school, a lot of people say that they learn to communicate this way in school by writing essays, because you have an introduction, 3 points, and a conclusion. And as you lead your reader through the 3 points, you draw them towards the conclusion, and if you've done that well, you've got good marks. But it just doesn't work in the modern business world via email. People are interrupted by your email. They're distracted when they get there. You've got to get their attention with the main point first thing up front, and then give the supporting details later. How do you write in this style now? No, you don't have to change yourself out of shape. All you need to do is invert the pyramid. If we come back to the F shape, you'll see that most of your recent emails will be making their main point at the bottom of the email. That's fine, write them the way you used to, but just before you finish, cut and paste your main point up the top. Invert the pyramid if you like. Make sure your main point is up front. Or if it's a long message, leave it at the bottom as well, so copy and paste, because people will often only remember the last thing they read in a longish email. So take advantage of that fact to invert the pyramid to make sure that the main point's up front, your reader gets it, they can unpack as much of the rest as they need to then take the action that you want. And here it is in an email format, using the ABC, where you have your action summary, which is usually your main point. After you've had a warm and brief greeting, you give background details, explanations, reasons, you close off, and you can see that that's inverted pyramid structure when you write your emails in that way. That would be probably the second most relevant of the 7 ways to write more effective email. The first one is establishing your desired outcome and using draft emails to let people know that quickly up front, and then writing your email in a way that gets attention straight away because your main point is up front. The last of these 7 ways to write more effective email is, as you can see, why should you write an email backwards? The email software sets it up so that you address it, write the subject line, and do the message. But we should actually turn this upside down. We should write the message first and then edit it. Give it a spell check, a grammar check, proofread, add bullet points if there's big blocks of text, and make sure the main point is at the top of the email. After we've done the editing, we should write the subject line. So write the message first, then write the subject line, and the last thing we should do is address it. And there's a good reason for this sequence of writing an email. Let me ask the question, which is the most important part of the email? Is it the message? Is it the subject line? Or is it the address line? People give varying answers to that, but I think that it's reasonably clear that the subject line is the most important part. We don't often get the address line wrong. Our biggest challenge is getting no response, and that often comes because we're not getting their attention at the subject line. That's why writing the subject line after the message is a better way to go about it. Let me ask you, do you have a clear idea how to write your subject line before or after you write your message? It's after, isn't it? Doesn't it distill in your own mind? You've written the message and you've put it into inverted pyramid format, and then you can write a much better quality, more accurate subject line after you write your message. And likewise, do you have a clearer idea who your message should be addressed to before you write it or after you write it? Again, once you go through the writing process, you tend to then have a clearer idea who needs to get this, who can be in the to-line, who could be CC'd, hey, who could be left out altogether. I'm just adding to overload by putting them in. And so you'll tend to send your message to less people. It'll be more highly targeted. It's got a subject line that grabs their attention, and you're more likely to get the outcomes you want when you use this sequence for writing an email rather than the one that's set up for us by our email software. It's a little thing, but it's amazing what difference it will make to us psychologically as we're writing the message. You will write a better subject line after the message. You will target the message more effectively if you do that last. So that's the 7 ways to write more effective email. Here's a chance for you to ask me a question, and you can do that by clicking the hand icon, and I can unmute your microphone and you can ask that question verbally if that's appropriate. Or if you're more comfortable, you can just type it into the chat box there and I will see that. So I'll give you a chance to ask any particular questions that you have. While you're doing that, I'll just summarize these 7 ways to write more effective email again. Number 1 is to think first. Is email in fact the best way for this message or for this person? We've talked about some ideas communicating effectively in an age of speed, of pressure, of urgency. Number 3 was, what is your desired outcome? Are you sending email to get an action or a response, or for the recipient just to read? Why not make it clear to them by using draft emails? We've talked about how to write better subject lines by making sure there's 3 components in the subject line. We've talked about how you can automate some of your follow-up. Because email inboxes are overloaded, we're having to do more of the follow-up manually, but you can use the system to automate some of that, particularly the first step. We've talked about why the inverted pyramid structure works best for breaking through, getting people's attention, engaging them so that they read more of the email or as much of the email as they need to then take the action that you're requiring. And we've talked about why you should write an email backwards, how the sequence of writing an email can actually have an impact on how effective it is. So I'll just come back after that summary to questions. If there's any questions, happy to stay on board now and take your questions. So again, click the icon or chat into the chat box. If there's no questions, what I will do is quickly tell you about another webinar that's coming up. I'm sure you'll be interested in it. It's the Sorry, I'm just, here it is. It's how to get your inbox empty by Christmas. At this time of the year, as we approach Christmas, a lot of people begin to feel really nervous about whether they can go away on a break and have their email under control. So this webinar is designed, has been run the last couple of years to help people get their inbox empty by the time they go on their Christmas break. So this one's scheduled for Tuesday, the 17th of December. So most people should be finishing for Christmas on the Friday. So it's designed to help you get that empty and slide into the end of the week and the end of the year. It runs from 1:30 to 2:15, and just quickly it will cover how to empty your inbox, how to quickly empty your inbox and do that straight away today, how to reorganize your folders so that they work more effectively for you, and how to use the 4D methodology to keep your inbox empty in the new year. Just recently I ran a hands-on workshop for some people. We gave them half an hour to use the 4D on their inbox, and 11 people got through 4,004 emails in 30 minutes because they were taught the 4D methodology. When they finished, we then got all of them to empty their inbox, and so when I left that workshop, they all had empty inboxes. They'd practiced 4Ds and knew how to keep it that way. We'd reorganised their folder structure, and they were working out of a whole new paradigm. Hopefully you'll join us and learn how you can do that at this webinar. The webinar includes 3 tips to help keep you on track in January. Plus, I'll send you a copy of the article, 7 Reasons that we should keep the inbox empty. And then adding to that, as a special bonus for those who sign up for that webinar, I'll give a 20-minute one-on-one coaching session online to help you stay on track and answer any specific questions that you might have in the new year. So that's the How to Get Your Inbox Empty webinar. That's on Tuesday the 17th of December. You can go to that website, the emailtiger.com.au, and under the webinar heading you can see how to empty your inbox. So I'll just quickly come back now to questions to see if there's any final questions. I'm not getting any, and that's often the case with webinars. People are a little reluctant or shy or slow to come up with questions, but if you do have a question later, please feel free to send me an email and let me know. And as the last thing, if you could just type into that chat box, out of these 7 ideas, what's been the one that stood out for you as the one that will be really most valuable? Which one really are you not using now that you think you could use and it could make a difference? Just give me some feedback there. Just take a couple of seconds. I'll put them up on the screen there now so that you can see them again. Which one of those 7 really stood out for you today? If you could just type that in the chat box and let me know, that'd be great. Thanks for those who are doing that. Excellent. Great. Yeah, some are saying number 3, some are saying number 6, the inverted pyramid structure, some are saying number 4, how to write a better subject line. That's great. Well, listen, thanks for your participation today. Thanks for interacting, for giving me some of your time. I know that's your most valuable resource, in fact, is time. And if you can make it, look forward to having you along to our How to Get Your Inbox Empty by Christmas webinar. But that's it for now. I'm going to close off. If you do want to keep in contact, the emailtiger.com.au website has got a regular blog. You can hook up with me on LinkedIn. The Email Tiger Facebook site has regular updates with news articles about what's going on in this space. And on the right-hand side of the screen there, you can see there's a range of things that I can do to assist you better manage email, both on incoming and outgoing email. So once again, thanks for your participation. I'll stay on now if there's any questions, but I'll close off the recording. Thanks for listening, and bye-bye for now.